I have spent 19 topics on this channel documenting everything Kody Brown failed to give his youngest daughter. The absence, the exploitation, the erasure, the silence across entire seasons of her childhood. And now, here is the twist that nobody saw coming. The most damning thing that can ever be said about Kody Brown's fatherhood is not that Truly is broken. It is that she is not. She is going to be okay. She is already okay. And the fact that she built that okayness without him, despite him, in the ruins of what he left behind, is the most complete and irrefutable verdict on everything he failed to be. That one truth lands harder than anything else in this entire series. If this is your first time here, hit that like button right now and subscribe to SisterWives Crew, because we go places other channels won't. And this final topic is the one that changes how you see everything that came before it. Now, let's talk about what it actually cost for Truly Brown to be okay. Before we get to the triumph, we have to hold the full weight of what preceded it. Because a story that skips straight to the resolution without making you feel the mountain first is not a tribute. It is a dismissal. And Truly Brown's story deserves more than that. She deserves to have every layer of what she came through acknowledged before anyone celebrates where she is landing. Think about what this child lived. She was born into a family that was already structurally impossible. A plural marriage with 4 wives, 18 children, and one man whose attention was, by mathematical necessity, divided into fractions so small they barely registered as presence at all. She did not choose that family. She was born into it. And before she was old enough to understand what a family was supposed to feel like, she was already living inside a version of one that was coming apart at every seam. Then came the move. Suddenly, without warning, the world she knew in Utah, the neighborhoods, the schools, and the ordinary geography of her childhood was dismantled. She was relocated to Nevada, and then Arizona, and none of it was her decision. None of it was explained to her satisfaction. She was a child being carried by the current of adult choices she had no power to influence, watching the familiar landmarks of her life disappear one by one in the rearview window of a moving truck. And then there were cameras. Truly Brown did not consent to having her childhood filmed. She did not sign a release. She was born into a storyline that was already in production. Her tears, her confusion, her ordinary childhood moments of vulnerability and need, all of it was captured, edited, and broadcast to millions of strangers. She grew up with no private space to simply be a child navigating difficulty. Everything was potential content. And some of it was deeply, irreversibly, publicly painful. And through all of this, her father was not reliably there. Not because he couldn't be, because of the choices he kept making about where to direct his finite time and attention. Christine's family got less and less of him as the years progressed. And Truly, as the youngest, as the one who had the fewest years to build a relationship with him before the erosion began, felt that absence in the most concentrated form. She was too young to have accumulated the memories that might have cushioned the loss. She got the withdrawal before she got enough of the deposit to draw from. That is the mountain. That is what we need to hold before we go one step further. Because only against that full weight does what happened next mean anything at all. Truly Brown is thriving. Right now, in real time, she is thriving. In Utah, with Christine, with David Woolley, with a home that has a consistent rhythm and a front door that people actually come back to. She is in school, she has a community, she has a mother who rebuilt her own life with such intention and such care that the reconstruction itself became a form of mothering. Every choice Christine made after leaving was made with Truly in mind. Every stable morning, every ordinary Tuesday, every dinner at a table where nobody had to wonder if they mattered, that was Christine doing the most serious work of her entire life. Not for a television audience, not for a storyline, for her daughter. And here is where this story starts to get complicated in the most important way, because being okay right now is real, and it is also not the final chapter. This is not pessimism. This is the research, and it matters enough to say clearly. The literature on daughters who experienced significant paternal emotional absence during childhood is remarkably consistent on one specific point. The deepest effects of that wound are the ones that reshape how a person understands love and builds relationships. Those effects often don't fully surface until young adulthood. until a daughter starts building her own romantic relationships and discovers, sometimes with shock and sometimes with grief, that the internal templates she developed during childhood were drawn by someone who wasn't present enough to draw them accurately. The questions that were never answered out loud have a way of returning, quietly, in the choices she makes at 22 and 25 and 28. This is not a prediction of catastrophe for Truly. It is an honest accounting of what may still lie ahead of her. And the reason it matters here is because the people who will walk with her through that next chapter, if and when it comes, are not Kody Brown. They are Christine and David. And the relationships she is building right now in a home that finally knows what consistency looks like. She will not walk through the harder chapters alone, but she will, in all likelihood, walk through them without her father, in the way that a daughter actually needs a father. And that is still, even now, a loss worth naming. What Christine built for Truly in Utah is not a feel-good postscript to a difficult story. It is a deliberate, architectural reconstruction of everything a childhood is supposed to contain, and everything the previous chapter failed to provide. Stability, routine, warmth. A mother who had done her own work and was therefore capable of being fully present, instead of managing her own grief while trying to parent. A home that felt like a home, not a production set, not a compromise, not a fraction of something that was never going to be whole. Christine Brown did not stumble into a better life for her daughter. She built it, on purpose, one ordinary day at a time. And the scaffolding she used for her own healing, her willingness to leave, her courage to start over in her 50s, was the most serious maternal project in the entire SisterWives story. Not the most dramatic, not the most televised, the most serious. Because it was done quietly, without an audience, without a confessional camera in the corner of the room. Just a mother deciding that her daughter deserved better, and then doing, every day, whatever better required. And then there is David Woolley. And I want to be precise about why David matters in Truly's story, because it is not about replacing Kody. Nobody replaces a father. That is not how this works. What David offered Truly is something different. And in some ways, more instructive, because it is the demonstration of what presence actually looks like in practice. The turning point in Truly Brown's story is not a dramatic confrontation. It is not a legal proceeding, or a filmed revelation, or a moment that will have its own episode title. It is something much quieter, and much more powerful than any of those things. It is the accumulation of ordinary days where a man showed up for school events, for dinner, for the unremarkable Tuesday afternoon of her life, and did not leave. He did not perform. He did not make presence conditional on how it felt that day, or what else was competing for his attention, or whether the cameras were rolling. He simply showed up, again and again and again. After a childhood of a father whose presence was the exception to his own absence, ordinary, consistent, undramatic presence is the most radical gift anyone could have offered Truly Brown. And David offered it. Not because he was trying to make a point, because that is simply who he appears to be. And for a child who had spent years learning to calibrate her expectations downward, learning not to need too much, learning to survive on whatever fraction of fatherhood was available, experiencing the opposite of all of that was not a small adjustment. It was a fundamental recalibration of what she was allowed to expect from the men in her life. That recalibration matters more than almost anything else in this story, because it is the foundation on which everything she builds next will stand. Now I want to tell you the thing that changes everything. The fact at the center of this final topic that reframes the entire arc of 19 previous videos. Because we have spent all of this time documenting Kody Brown's failures, and all of that documentation is accurate and important, and it will stand. But here, at the end, is the twist. Kody Brown accidentally gave Truly Brown something he never intended to give her, and cannot claim credit for. Something that will protect her for the rest of her life. The research on daughters who had emotionally absent biological fathers, but gained consistent male presence during mid-childhood through stepfathers, through extended family, through mentors, shows a specific and remarkable outcome. These daughters develop over time an extraordinarily sophisticated ability to distinguish between performed love and practiced love, between a man who tells you he loves you and a man who demonstrates it so consistently that the words almost become redundant. They cannot be convinced that someone loves them. They require it to be shown repeatedly, over time, in the unremarkable moments that nobody is filming. This is the daughter truly Brown is becoming. This is the superpower her childhood is forging in her, painfully, without her consent, in the specific crucible of her specific experience. She has watched, across 18 seasons in high definition, what it looks like when a man performs fatherhood. She has studied it so closely and for so long that she will never be fooled by the performance again. She will know the difference the moment she encounters it in a future partner, in a friendship, in anyone who tries to substitute words for presence. Kody Brown gave truly Brown, through everything he failed to do, the one thing she will carry into every relationship for the rest of her life: the inability to be deceived by the imitation of love. That immunity, as painful as its origins are, will protect her from choices that lesser experiences might have left her vulnerable to. He did not intend it. He cannot take credit for it. But it is real, and it belongs to her now. And nothing, not his revised narrative, not his preferred version of history, not any platform he still has access to, can take it back. And that brings us to the final betrayal, the one that is still happening, the one that does not end with the divorce papers. Kody Brown still has a platform, and he is still using it. And every single time he uses it to construct a version of himself as a father who tried, who was misunderstood, who loved deeply even when circumstances made presence impossible, every single time that narrative goes out into the world and finds an audience, truly Brown's actual, documented, filmed, on-the-record experience gets quietly overwritten by his preferred version of events. And that is not an accident. That is a choice, made repeatedly, in public, with full awareness that the child at the center of the story has no equivalent platform to correct the record. Think about what that actually means. Kody Brown can sit across from a camera in the year 2024 and describe himself as a devoted father who was failed by circumstances and by the decisions of the women around him. He can frame his absence as the consequence of other people's choices rather than the product of his own. He can speak with emotion, with apparent sincerity, with the practiced fluency of a man who has been constructing this particular narrative for years, and some portion of the viewing audience will believe him. Because he is articulate, because he appears earnest, because the story he is telling is the kind of story we are culturally conditioned to find sympathetic: the wounded patriarch, the man who tried, the father whose love was real, even if his presence was not. And truly cannot answer him. She is a child. She does not have a podcast. She does not have a confessional camera. She has her life, the quiet, ordinary, rebuilt life that Christine constructed for her in Utah. And she has no mechanism for entering the public conversation about her own childhood on her own terms. She is subject to other people's narration of her experience in ways that are, frankly, one of the more disturbing dynamics in this entire story. Her father can speak about her fatherhood in public forums indefinitely. She can only live her truth in private. And the gap between those two realities is itself a form of ongoing harm. The divorce ended his marriage to Christine. It did not end his capacity to narrate Truly's childhood in ways that serve his image over her experience. And that capacity, that ongoing ability to be the loudest voice in a conversation that is fundamentally about someone else's life, is the final way that Kody Brown's choices continue to cost his daughter something she should never have been asked to pay. But here's the thing about Truly Brown that I keep coming back to. The thing that sits underneath all of this analysis and refuses to be reduced to a talking point. She is not waiting for her father to get it right. She stopped waiting. And not in the dramatic, declarative way that makes for a good confessional scene, but in the quiet, practical, daily way of a child who has learned to build her life from the materials that are actually available to her, rather than the ones she was supposed to have. She is not defined by his absence. She is not organized around the wound. She is a kid growing up in a stable home with a mother who loves her and a stepfather who shows up and siblings who stay connected. And she is doing what children with those resources do. She is living. She is growing. She is becoming someone. And I want to talk for a moment about the SisterWives community, because this series has existed in a specific conversation with a specific audience, and that audience deserves to be spoken to directly at the end of this arc. The SisterWives fandom, and I am using that word with full respect for what it actually represents, has been, across the years this show has aired, one of the most perceptive audiences in reality television. They watched this family across nearly 2 decades, and they understood dynamics that the production, and certainly Kody Brown, either could not or would not articulate clearly. They saw Christine's pain before Christine fully named it. They understood what the plural marriage structure was costing the women and children involved before any of those women had the language or the freedom to say it publicly. And they saw, early and clearly, that Christine's children would be okay if she left. They said it when it was still a controversial thing to say. They said it when Christine was still trying to hold the marriage together with increasingly visible exhaustion. They said it when the idea of leaving still seemed, to Christine herself, like something that might not be survivable. They were right. Truly Brown's current life is proof of that. The community's read was not wishful thinking. It was not a projection. It was a careful, sustained, evidence-based observation of this family's actual dynamics over actual time. And the conclusion they reached, years before the conclusion became undeniable, turned out to be correct. And I think that deserves to be said directly and without qualification. You saw this clearly, before most people were willing to look, before the narrative made it easy to see. You looked anyway, and you understood what you were seeing. That is not a small thing. This channel exists in conversation with that kind of audience, and I don't take that for granted. Now I want to make the final prediction in this series, and I want to make it carefully, because predictions about children's futures carry a weight that demands honesty and not just optimism. Truly Brown will reach adulthood. She will carry with her the specific shape of a specific childhood. The losses, the displacements, the filmed vulnerabilities, the documented absences. Those things are part of her now, woven into the structure of who she is, and they will not disappear. Some of them will surface in ways she doesn't expect, in moments she doesn't anticipate, in relationships that inadvertently touch the parts of her early life that still need tending. That is not a tragedy. That is what being human after difficulty looks like. It is not a straight line. It is not a clean resolution. It is the ongoing, non-linear, sometimes surprising work of integrating an unusual childhood into a functional, meaningful adult life. And she will do that work. I am as confident of that as I am of anything in this analysis, because the evidence of who she is already is the resilience, the adaptability, the capacity to maintain warmth and connection across years of disruption points clearly towards someone who has the internal resources to face what comes next. She will not do it alone. She will do it with Christine, who has done her own version of this work and will understand, from the inside, what the process requires. She will do it with David, who has demonstrated the kind of steady, undemanding presence that makes it safe for someone to process difficulty without fear of the support disappearing. She will do it with her siblings Aspen, McKelty, Peyton, Gwendolyn, the siblings who maintained their bond with her across the geographic and relational chaos of the family's dissolution. She will not do it with Kody Brown. Not in the way she needed, maybe in some limited, complicated, adult-negotiated way that looks nothing like the father-daughter relationship she deserved, but is still better than nothing. Maybe not even that. The shape of that relationship going forward is hers to determine, on her own timeline, in her own terms, and whatever she decides will be the right decision because it will be hers. The first decision about her relationship with her father that she will have been old enough to make with full awareness of what she is choosing and why. Here is what I believe Truly Brown will become. And I mean this not as sentiment, but as a genuine, evidence-grounded projection of the person her experiences are shaping her to be. She will be someone who loves with extraordinary specificity, not the broad, performative, declaration-heavy love that her father modeled, but the quiet, detail-oriented, I remembered the thing you mentioned 3 weeks ago love that comes from knowing at the cellular level what it costs when someone doesn't pay attention. She will remember the things that matter to the people she loves. She will show up for the ordinary days that most people treat as filler between the important ones. She will understand better than most people ever do that the ordinary Tuesday is not filler. The ordinary Tuesday is the relationship. The ordinary Tuesday is the proof. She will be extraordinarily difficult to fool. Not in a damaged, closed, self-protective way, but in the way of someone who has seen the full performance of love up close and studied its specific textures long enough to know it instantly upon encountering it again. She will not be convinced by declarations. She will wait for the demonstration. She will wait as long as it takes, and she will not apologize for requiring it. That discernment is not a wound, it is a tool, and she will use it to build a life populated with people who are genuinely there, rather than people who are skilled at appearing to be. She will be, in whatever form her adult life takes, whether that includes her own children or not, the kind of person who makes the people around her feel specifically, individually, irreplaceably seen, because she knows what the alternative feels like. She knows it from the inside. She knows the specific texture of being present in a room where the most important person is looking past you. And having known that, having lived it across years of her earliest and most formative life, she will spend the rest of her days offering people the opposite of it. Not because she made a decision to be that way, because she was shaped into it. Because her childhood, in all its difficulty and complexity and loss, made her into someone who understands presence as the primary currency of love, and who will spend it generously, specifically, and without reservation. Every one of those moments, every ordinary Tuesday she shows up for, every detail she remembers, every time she makes someone feel genuinely seen in a world that is very good at looking without seeing, will be the answer she never got to give Kody Brown out loud. This is what you should have been. This is what it looks like when someone stays. This is what it costs, and what it gives when a person finally gets it right. And I want to sit in that for a moment before we close this series, because I think it is the most important thing this channel has said across 20 topics, and I want it to land the way it deserves to. Kody Brown built his daughter's greatest strength, not through love, through absence, not through intention, through the specific and sustained failure to be what she needed him to be. He accidentally equipped her, through everything he withheld, with the most powerful tool she will ever carry, the knowledge of what real presence feels like, because she spent her formative years living without it. And the full impact of that absence will ensure she never mistakes the imitation for the real thing again. He did not mean to give her that. He cannot take credit for it. It is not a redemption arc for him. It is not a silver lining that makes his failures easier to bear. It is simply the truth. The final, strange, ironic truth at the end of this entire story. The man who was least present in Truly Brown's childhood is the reason she will spend her adulthood demanding and recognizing and choosing and becoming a genuine presence. He built the very standard she will hold the world to by failing to meet it. That is not poetic justice. It is not a happy ending. It is something more complicated and more true than either of those things. It is what actually happens when children survive the specific failure of the people who were supposed to protect them. They build from the wreckage, something the person who failed them would never have had the wisdom to construct intentionally. Truly Brown is going to be okay. More than okay. She is going to be extraordinary. And Kody Brown's fatherhood, in the end, will be remembered not for what it gave her, but for what she built in the space where it was supposed to be. That is the verdict. That is the final, complete, irrefutable verdict on everything this series has documented across 20 topics. Not that he broke her, that she built something from the breaking that is stronger than what he could have given her on his best day. Not that she is fine despite him, that she is becoming extraordinary through the specific alchemy of surviving him, and that the survival itself, quiet, ongoing, undramatic, daily, is the most complete indictment of his fatherhood that any court, any camera, or any comment section could ever produce. We have been on a long journey together. 20 topics, hundreds of thousands of words, one child's story, told with as much honesty and care as this format allows. And I want to end this arc the way it deserves to end, with genuine gratitude for the community that has watched it, engaged with it, challenged it, and cared about it enough to follow it to the end. Thank you for caring about Truly Brown's story, not in the abstract, parasocial reality TV way, but in the real way. The way that means you sat with the uncomfortable parts and didn't look away. That means you thought about what this child's experience actually represents, not as a storyline, not as content, not as drama, but as the life of a real person who deserved better and is figuring out how to build it anyway. That kind of audience is rare. This channel has been lucky enough to find it, and I don't take that for granted for a single second. If this series gave you something real, share this final video with someone who needs to hear that children are resilient, Not because pain doesn't damage them, but because they find ways to build with the wreckage. That is the most important thing this series has said, and it deserves to reach beyond the people who are already watching. Like every video in this series that gave you something worth keeping. Not because the algorithm demands it, but because it is the signal that this kind of careful, honest, sustained storytelling is worth continuing. And I believe it is. And I think you do too. Otherwise you would not be here, at the end of 20 topics, still watching. Subscribe to SisterWives Crew if you have not already, because this channel is not finished with the SisterWives story. Not by a long way. Topics 21 through 30 are already in development, and they go places this series has not gone yet. They ask questions that the show never answered. They follow threads that the cameras dropped. They look at the people and moments and decisions that have never received the full examination they deserve. You are not going to want to miss what comes next. Truly Brown is going to be okay. She is already okay. And she did it without him. And that is everything.